The first gunshot shattered the stillness of the Montana morning, echoing like thunder across the snow-covered pines of Clearwater Forest. Birds burst from the trees in frightened flocks, their wings slicing through the gray sky. 6-year-old Anya Bennett stood frozen on the trail, her tiny figure swallowed by a thick red coat, breath fogging in the cold. She didn't flinch when the second shot rang out, just stared ahead, wide-eyed, heart pounding in her ears. Up ahead, 3 men in camouflage pushed through the knee-deep snow, rifles raised. Their eyes were locked on a steel enclosure nestled beyond a ridge. "Kid, get back!" one of them shouted, voice tight with panic. "That thing's dangerous." But Anya didn't move. She did something no one expected. She ran toward it, toward the massive black figure pacing behind the chain-link fence, toward the creature 4 times her size whose amber eyes gleamed like molten gold in the pale light, toward the Wolfdog, toward midnight. From the trail below, her mother, Claire Bennett, cried out. "Anya, no!" Her voice broke, half strangled by fear. But the little girl was already there, standing between the armed men and the beast. Her hand rose slowly, not trembling, but steady, almost commanding. Midnight stopped pacing. His ears twitched. Then, without a sound, he sat. "You can't hurt him," Anya said firmly, voice small but unshakable. "He's mine." The hunters stared, dumbfounded. Their fingers eased off the triggers, eyes flicking between the girl and the animal that had become still, watchful, calm, not a hint of aggression in its stance. The snow muffled everything. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. That 1 second, when a silent child and a wild creature locked eyes, would later be described in courtrooms and in academic papers and on national television. But in that instant, it was simply a mother frozen in terror, a group of stunned men, and a girl with a hidden past and a strange mark on her wrist, standing fearlessly before something no one else dared approach. It was the moment their lives changed forever. And no one, not even the wild itself, would ever forget it. Anya Bennett was not like other children. From the moment she entered the world, something about her felt distant. She didn't cry at birth, didn't babble, didn't reach for her mother's touch. Claire, a single mother still mourning the sudden loss of her husband in a logging accident, had tried to explain away the silence. Maybe Anya was just slow to warm up. Maybe grief ran too deep, even in someone so young. But as the years passed, it became painfully clear Anya wasn't growing into the world. She was slipping further away from it. By the time she was 3, doctors confirmed what Claire already suspected: severe autism spectrum disorder. Still, nothing prepared her for the isolation that followed. Anya avoided eye contact, shunned even the gentlest touch, and never spoke. Not a single word. Her days passed in a quiet fog, withdrawn and unreachable, her world made of shadows and silence. Claire tried everything: therapy dogs, occupational sessions, group playdates, music classes, but nothing seemed to reach her little girl. And then there was the mark. A faint, oddly distinct birthmark on Anya's left wrist, shaped unmistakably like a wolf's paw. Doctors dismissed it as a harmless congenital nevus. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling it meant something more. It felt ancient, like a symbol of something older than medicine could explain. Friends called it cute. Others found it unsettling. But to Claire, it was a mystery she couldn't let go of. One late autumn afternoon, worn thin from a particularly unproductive therapy session, Claire followed a flyer to the outskirts of town. It led her to an aging husky sanctuary run by a reclusive man named Samuel Grant. He was gruff, with silver hair and eyes the color of frost. "I've got one left," he told her, voice low. "He's different." They walked past rows of enclosures, each filled with barking dogs, but at the far end, one pen stood silent. Inside sat a black pup, not barking, not pacing, just watching. When Anya saw him, she moved. No prompting, no coaxing. She walked straight to the fence, pressed her tiny hand against the wire. The pup rose, slowly, quietly. He stepped forward and placed his nose exactly where her palm met the mesh. Claire gasped. It was the first time her daughter had reached for anything, anyone. Samuel glanced down, caught sight of the mark on Anya's wrist, and his eyes narrowed. "Well," he said softly, "the wolf has found her." Claire brought the black pup home that same afternoon. Something about the way Anya had looked at him, like she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't, left Claire with no room for doubt. Samuel had offered him at a surprisingly low price. No papers, just a quiet warning. He's not like the others. Claire wasn't sure what he meant. But that night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the forest cast long shadows across their backyard, she watched her daughter curl up on the floor beside the crate without hesitation. She didn't speak, didn't ask, she simply laid her hand on the bars. The pup pressed his nose to her wrist once again, and they both sat like that, in silence, as if no one else in the world existed. She named him Midnight. From the very beginning, it was clear this wasn't a typical bond between child and dog. Within days, Anya began whispering, barely audible murmurs, but words nonetheless. Claire could hardly believe it. Her daughter, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in years, now whispered quietly to this strange pup. By the end of the first week, she was talking in full phrases, still only to Midnight, but talking nonetheless. Claire wept the first time she heard laughter echo through the living room. Anya laughed, at something Midnight had done. She started to draw again, too. Page after page, all the same theme. A black wolf and a little girl, always beneath a sky filled with stars. But Midnight didn't stay small for long. By 4 months, he weighed over 60 pounds. At 6 months, he was taller than Anya. His eyes, golden and sharp, gleamed with something Claire couldn't quite place. Intelligence? Awareness? He watched everything. Measured, calm, never reactive. Protective. When a neighbor's dog wandered too close to their property, Midnight didn't bark or growl. He simply stood, motionless, every muscle coiled, gaze fixed. He didn't move until Anya walked outside and placed her hand gently on his side. Only then did he exhale and sit. Claire turned to her colleague, Dr. Marcus Lane, a seasoned veterinarian. "You ever seen anything like him?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think that's a dog at all." Claire's stomach turned. She didn't know whether to be afraid or in awe. But one thing was certain. Whatever Midnight was, he belonged to Anya. And Anya belonged to him. As Midnight continued to grow, so did the unease in Claire's chest. By 8 months, he was larger than any domestic dog she'd ever encountered. And it wasn't just his size, it was his presence. He moved with the grace of a predator and the patience of something older. His reactions were unnervingly precise, his silence almost reverent. And through it all, he remained tethered to Anya, never straying far from her side. She spoke to him more than to anyone else, and he seemed to understand her every unspoken thought. But word had begun to spread in the quiet town of Clearwater. They let that thing sleep next to the girl? Claire Bennett's raising a wolf. And then one morning, a trio of hunters appeared at the edge of the woods near their property, rifles slung over their shoulders, worry etched on their faces. They weren't poachers. They were neighbors, afraid. Fear has a way of bending reason, and Claire knew something had to be done before fear turned into action. She made a call. 2 weeks later, she stood in a sterile lab at the University of Montana, watching as Dr. Elena Vasquez, a leading wildlife geneticist, examined Midnight with careful precision. Blood samples were taken, measurements recorded. An hour stretched into 3. Then came the call days later that would change everything. "The results are complicated," Dr. Vasquez said, her tone cautious. "Midnight is approximately 87% northwestern gray wolf, 9% Siberian husky. The rest, it's an unidentified hybridization, something undocumented." Claire's throat tightened. "Is he dangerous?" "Not necessarily, but legally he qualifies as a high-content wolfdog. Montana law requires permanent identification, reinforced containment, and technically he shouldn't be in a residential area." Claire's heart broke before the words even finished leaving the doctor's mouth. Midnight would have to go. That night, after Anya had fallen asleep, clutching a sketch of Midnight beneath a full moon, Claire sat alone on the porch. The wind whispered through the pines like voices from another time. It was then that she remembered a name, a man locals called the Old Storyteller. Elder Jonah Whitefeather, a respected voice in the nearby indigenous community. She visited him the next day, unsure what answers she was even looking for. After she told him everything, he was silent for a long time. Then he looked at her and spoke slowly. "That mark on your daughter's wrist? Among my people, we call it the wolf's embrace. It is not random, it is ancestral." Claire felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "Your daughter," he said softly, "was born with a calling. And that creature? He didn't find her by accident." It began with subtle changes, nothing alarming at first. Midnight, once full of power and restless energy, started sleeping more. His glossy black coat dulled, shedding in uneven patches. He stopped eating with his usual appetite, his golden eyes dimming with something Claire couldn't quite name. At the same time, Anya, who had blossomed in recent months, began withdrawing again. She no longer laughed at Midnight's quiet antics. Her drawings grew darker, her limbs heavy. And then came the nosebleeds, the unexplained bruises, the fatigue that clung to her like a second skin. Claire couldn't ignore the signs anymore. A trip to the pediatrician turned into a whirlwind of tests. 3 days later, she found herself sitting motionless in a white-walled corridor, the sterile smell of antiseptic thick in the air. A hematologist sat across from her, voice gentle but unrelenting. "Your daughter has acute myeloid leukemia," he said. "It's rare, it's aggressive, but we caught it early." Claire's breath caught. Her world narrowed to a single, echoing thought: no, not both of them. Because only days earlier, she had received the call from Wildhaven Reserve, the specialized wolf sanctuary where she had reluctantly relocated Midnight for his own safety. They'd found something. A mass, likely cancer, aggressive, spreading fast. The same week, 2 diagnoses, 2 lives, tethered not just by love, but now by illness. It felt cruel, cosmic even. In desperation, Claire returned to Wildhaven, not just to see Midnight, but to beg for help. The sanctuary's lead biologist, Dr. Logan Pierce, had been following Midnight's decline with growing concern. After hearing about Anya's diagnosis, he began running simulations, comparing DNA markers from earlier tests. What he found shook him. "There's a mirrored mutation," he told Claire during an emergency meeting. "Something extremely rare. It appears both Anya and Midnight share a unique genetic anomaly. I call it the bridge gene." Across the room, Elder Jonah, who had remained quietly seated, finally spoke. "This is what I meant. The bond between them was never just emotional. It is biological, spiritual, written in blood and spirit." Logan leaned forward, eyes intense. "There might be a way to save them, but it's risky, and it's never been done." Claire's hands trembled. "Tell me," she whispered. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." The night before the procedure, a stillness settled over Wildhaven Reserve, unlike any it had known before. The forest, usually alive with rustling leaves and distant howls, seemed to hold its breath. Under a sky cloaked in deep indigo and scattered with trembling stars, a sacred fire crackled softly at the heart of the sanctuary. No words were spoken at first. There was no music, no chanting, only smoke, silence, and the solemn presence of those who understood the gravity of what was to come. Anya sat on a woven blanket near the fire, her small frame pale and fragile beneath layers of wool. Midnight lay beside her, head resting gently across her legs. His breath was shallow, his body thin, but his golden eyes remained locked on the girl he had never once turned away from. Claire stood nearby, her heart aching with helpless love, while Elder Jonah Whitefeather knelt across the circle from them. In his hands, he held a carved wooden bowl filled with sacred herbs that glowed faintly in the firelight. "This is not magic," he said softly, dipping his fingers into the smoke. "This is memory, passed down in blood and bone." He pressed his smoke-covered fingers first to Anya's marked wrist, then to the center of Midnight's chest. The fire hissed as sparks flared, dancing briefly in the air. "Two spirits," Jonah whispered, "one thread. Walk this path together. Heal if the spirits will it." Anya didn't speak. She didn't need to. Slowly, she reached her hand into Midnight's thick fur, resting it just above his heart. He exhaled a deep, low breath, as if answering in his own language, something older than words, older than fear. Those who witnessed the ceremony would later say the air had shifted, as if the veil between two worlds had grown thin. Time, for a brief moment, felt suspended. When it was over, Jonah nodded once and rose. "Now," he said, turning to Claire, "you may proceed with the science. The bond has been acknowledged." Claire knelt and gathered her daughter in her arms, her voice trembling. "We're ready," she whispered. Behind them, Midnight stood, weak but steady, and turned his gaze toward the clinic where their shared fate waited. The spirit had answered. Now it was time to test the blood. Dawn broke slowly over Wildhaven the next morning, the sky painted in hues of soft lavender and gold. But inside the sanctuary's research wing, there was no sense of day or night, only quiet urgency. The surgical suite had been transformed into a space never before imagined, Side by side, pediatric and veterinary teams worked in tandem, united by something greater than science, a bond that defied species, logic, and reason. Behind two panes of glass, Anya and Midnight lay sedated on separate operating tables. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked with steady rhythm. Dr. Logan Pierce stood at the center, directing the team with unwavering focus. Every step had been rehearsed, every risk calculated, yet the tension in the room was thick with uncertainty. This was uncharted territory. A cross-species bone marrow transplant had never been attempted before. First, they extracted stem cells from Midnight's bone marrow, filtering them for genetic compatibility with Anya's unique immune system. Then, the reverse. A carefully measured portion of Anya's marrow was prepared for infusion into Midnight's bloodstream. The presence of the bridge gene in both had made this possible. But the science was still only theory. What they were attempting was as close to a miracle as modern medicine allowed. Claire watched from behind the glass, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, barely breathing. Margaret Ellis, the sanctuary's founder, sat beside her in silence. Elder Jonah murmured quiet prayers, eyes closed, palms resting gently on his knees. Hours passed, each minute stretching into eternity. Then, a flicker. Anya's white blood cell count, which had plummeted for weeks, began to climb, slowly, steadily. Her temperature stabilized, her breathing evened. A nurse whispered, "She's responding." Across the room, Midnight stirred. His chest rose with deeper breaths. His ears twitched. And then, impossibly, his eyes opened, glazed but aware. 2 days later, Anya woke. She didn't speak at first, just blinked at the ceiling, then turned her head slowly toward the glass. Her lips parted, and in a whisper so soft Claire barely caught it, she said, "He's awake." Moments later, Midnight was wheeled into the adjacent recovery pen. As soon as he saw her, he lifted his head, gave a low, unmistakable whine, and pressed his paw gently to the glass. The impossible had happened. Together they had survived. Spring arrived at Wildhaven not with fanfare, but with quiet grace. The snow gave way to mossy trails, and the pines whispered in softer winds. Anya, now 7, walked those trails again. Her steps were lighter, her laughter, once lost, now returned like birdsong after a long winter. By her side, Midnight kept pace, his gait slower, his muzzle graying, but his presence as steady and protective as ever. Though both still bore the scars of what they'd endured, something unspoken had passed between them. They were no longer just survivor and companion, they were legend. The sanctuary had changed too. In the months following their recovery, Margaret Ellis launched a new initiative, the Bridge Program, offering therapeutic experiences to children with autism, trauma, and emotional challenges. Anya became its youngest ambassador. She led small groups of visitors through carefully monitored enclosures, explaining animal behavior with gestures and calm authority that seemed beyond her years. Her bond with Midnight had transformed into something greater, a living example of healing, connection, and purpose. Then came the unexpected miracle. Midnight, despite the odds and his previous illness, had fathered a litter with a rescued female hybrid. Among the pups, one stood apart. She was smaller, quieter, with dark fur and piercing eyes that seemed to watch everything from a distance. For weeks, she stayed at the edge of the group, skittish and silent, until one afternoon, Anya sat alone by the fence, sketching in her notebook. The pup approached slowly, then placed a single paw on Anya's lap. Claire gasped. The gesture was identical to the one Midnight had made years ago. "She remembers," Anya said softly, barely above a whisper. "The thread." The pup was named Ember. As summer deepened, Ember grew bolder, often trailing behind Anya during her tours. Visitors watched in awe as Midnight, Ember, and Anya moved like a unit, bound by something no words could quite explain. One evening, as golden light filtered through the trees, Anya paused at the edge of the sanctuary and turned to a group of children. "Sometimes," she said, her voice clear and sure, "we're born different. Not broken, just meant for something else." Midnight sat beside her. Ember curled at her feet, and the forest held its breath, as if it too understood the sacredness of what it was witnessing. In a world driven by logic, science, and schedules, it's easy to overlook the quiet magic that surrounds us. The silent bonds, the unseen threads that tie hearts together across species, time, and even understanding. Anya and Midnight's story was never just about a girl and her wolfdog. It was about something deeper. The undeniable truth that connection transcends language, that love knows no boundaries, and that sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine alone, but from companionship, trust, and an ancient kind of wisdom. Through the darkest nights, their bond endured. When science had no guarantees, and when fear whispered louder than hope, it was love, unspoken, unwavering, that lit the way forward. They reminded us that being different is not a flaw, it's often a gift. And that in nature, in the wild creatures we often fear or ignore, there lies a mirror reflecting both our vulnerability and our strength. The legacy they left behind, the Bridge program, the lives they touched, the stories they inspired, is a testament to what's possible when we stop seeing animals as lesser and start recognizing them as partners in our journey through life. So let this story be more than just a tale. Let it be a call to open our hearts, to protect the voiceless, and to honor the quiet souls who walk beside us with silent loyalty. Every creature, no matter how wild or different, has value, and sometimes it's the ones we least expect who end up saving us. Love animals. Respect them. Listen when they speak, not with words, but with presence. Because somewhere out there, someone like Midnight is waiting for someone like Anya. And the world needs that kind of love more than ever.